The closing process is actually 3 easy steps. Step 1, close revenues to retain earnings. The only thing you have to be on the lookout for is if you have multiple revenue accounts. In our example here, we just have one revenue account, service revenue. To close or zero out this account, we'll need to place a debit on the left side of the T account, as the service revenue account already has a balance on the credit side of $600. So once again, to zero out this account, we'll start by placing a $600 entry on the debit side of the revenue account. Now with every debit, we need a credit, and since we're closing this balance to the retained earnings account, we'll go over to the credit side of retained earnings and enter 600 there. That completes step 1. Of course, if we had multiple revenue accounts, we'd repeat the process for the next revenue account and any others. Step 2 says to close expenses to retain earnings. Once again, closing simply means to zero out the account. We have 2 expense accounts, rent expense and supplies expense. To close these accounts, we'll need to place credits on the right side of the account. So I'll start here with rent expense and place a credit of $80. I'll also want to put a credit next to the supplies expense account of $40 to close out that account. Now, I could put individual entries over to the retained earnings account for both $80 and $40 on the debit side. Since we had credits here, we'll need debits here. But since I did both of these entries at the same time in the same step, I'm just going to add them up and put one big debit of $120 on the retained earnings side. And of course, that closes the expenses to the retained earnings account, step 2. Step 3 says to close dividends to the retained earnings account. A very similar process here. The dividends account already has a debit balance of $30, so to close this account out, we'll need to place a credit of $30 on the right side of that dividends account. And with every credit, we need a debit to go along with it. So on the retained earnings side, we'll debit $30 there. That will go ahead and close out all of the accounts, zero everything out. And if you notice here, if you actually look at all the accounts that have been closed, these all have zero balances now. Notice that during this process, we did not impact any of these accounts up here, any of the assets or liability accounts. These are what we determined to be permanent accounts, and they're not closed out during the closing process. So the best way to do the closing process is just to follow these 3 steps in order, exactly as I've shown you here.